Majid Ehsan to please come on the stage and deliver the opening remarks. Sir, please.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Ambassador Inamul Haq, Chairman, IPRI Board of Governors, Lieutenant General Khalid Ahmed Kidwai, today's distinguished guest speaker, dear guests, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum, and very warm welcome to Islamabad Policy Research Institute. First of all, let me thank General Kidwai for sparing time and visiting us today as a distinguished guest speaker. Although he is a frequent visitor to IPRI, but this time he especially spared time and came on my request to educate us on strategic deterrence, and especially how it is defined after the recent incidents of May 2025. Ladies and gentlemen, the term strategic deterrence was born out of necessity after the atomic shock the world went through during the strikes on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945. And it was the first time the world came to know that a single weapon system can annihilate a complete city. And now, you know, the devastation is much more than that. It was Bernard Brodie who is credited to have first defined the concept of strategic deterrence, and right after the Second World War. And he actually is known to his famous line, which he wrote in his book, Absolute Weapon, Atomic Power and World Order in 1946, says that thus far the chief purpose of our military establishment has been to win wars. From now onward, its chief purpose must be to avert them. It can have almost no other useful purpose. And this went on till 1949, once, for the first time, as a response, Soviet Union test-fired its atomic bombs, and that transformed the nuclear weapons from a tool of absolute superiority into a system of mutual deterrence. Thus, a series of definitions and studies on strategic deterrence started off from Bernard Brodie to Wohlstetter, Thomas Schelling, and Herman Kahn in 1950s, 60s, 70s, and it still continues. And the famous terminologies and concept of three pillars of capability, credibility, and communication, mutually assured destruction, and famous 44 rungs of Herman Kahn were actually coined with structured thinking about escalation, counterforce, surviving nuclear exchanges, and it all emerged, and the study still, as I said, continues. In India-Pakistan context, it was established by Pakistan once on 28th May 1998. We responded to second Indian's nuclear test of 11th May. And during these 17 days, from 11th May to 28 days, I remember India was a different country. There was such a bombardment of statements and physical actions by India against Pakistan that it is worth remembering. I still remember the statements of L.K. Advani, who was not the Minister of External Affairs in those days. He was only heading BJP. Once he said that India calls Pakistan's nuclear capability a bluff. And Mr. George Fernandez, who was the Defense Minister of India, he said that Pakistan should wake up to the changed geostrategic environment wherein India is now a power to reckon with in South Asia. And Mr. Jaswant Singh, who was still not the appointed minister, external affairs minister, he said that India emerges as a regional power at the dawn of 21st century. But Alhamdulillah, Pakistan set the balance of power achieved by our nuclear display of nuclear capability, and this balance of power played a critical role in restricting Indian responses later on in Kargil during 1999, and then during the standoffs and escalations of 2001, 2002, 2008. And simultaneously, India also started carving out the space for conventional war with Pakistan during all this period. Their cold start doctrine, their proactive operations, And now the reorganized Rudra brigades, in which they are reorganizing their integrated battle groups into independent battle groups with all arms representations, with more agility and with more capability of capturing tactically significant objectives all along the borders and choke Pakistani responses. Simultaneously, India also tried to limit Pakistan's nuclear deterrence through their various actions which were transformed as a result of surgical strikes in the aftermath of Pathankot, Uri incidents of 2016, and then later on the famous Balakot crisis of 2019, and now very recently once India had the courage to limit our deterrence and attack on the mainland Pakistan with missiles and drones. Although we have always, with our QPQ plus response, responded very effectively to all Indians' overtures, and we have actually stood firm on our full spectrum deterrence within the bounds of credible minimum deterrence, and also have tied up Indians in what the Shakespearean phrase says, that we have been hoisting them with their own petard. But still, India has been attempting to carve out new normals. And this actually use of conventional missiles and drones across the international border for the first time is being a very testing times for us. Is this stability-instability paradox leading both the countries to a series of routine limited wars? Or is it dangerous and devastating enough to erode the very fiber of deterrence and cause a catastrophe of unimaginable scale? These are the few questions on which we would request our distinguished guest speaker to please shed some light and educate us all. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, sir, for your remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, it is now time for us to hear from our distinguished chief guest, Lieutenant General Khalid Ahmed Kidwai. General Kidwai has led a meritorious military service spanning over 55 years. He has held a variety of prestigious command, staff, and instructional appointments and is a graduate of Pakistan's Command and Staff College, National Defense University, and the U.S. Army Field Artillery School, Fort Sill, Oklahoma. After the May 1998 nuclear tests, Lieutenant General Kidwai pioneered the establishment of Pakistan's National Command Authority and became the founding Director General of Strategic Plans Division. He served as Director General SPD for over 15 years and since 2014 is an advisor to the National Command Authority. As DG SPD, the General conceived, articulated, and executed Pakistan's nuclear policy and deterrence doctrines and translated these doctrines into a robust nuclear force structure. He also oversaw and ensured the establishment of the Army, Navy, and Air Force Strategic Force Commands, including the development and operationalization of a variety of nuclear weapons. The General put in place state-of-the-art command and control systems, as well as an effective nuclear security regime for Pakistan's strategic assets. The resultant policy of full-spectrum deterrence ensures Pakistan's national security, strategic stability, and peace in South Asia. He is also the architect of Pakistan's Civilian Nuclear Energy Vision 2050. In recognition of his devotion to duty, strategic vision, and outstanding leadership of Pakistan's nuclear and space programs, Lieutenant General Khalid Kidwai has been awarded Pakistan's highest civil award, the Nishan-e-Imtiaz, the second highest civil award, Hilal-e-Imtiaz, in addition to Hilal-e-Imtiaz military. Let us warmly welcome our honorable guest for his remarks. Sir, the floor is yours.
Ambassador Inamul Haq Sahab, Lieutenant General Madej Ehsan, ladies and gentlemen, I am greatly honored to have been invited by Pakistan's premier think tank, Islamabad Policy Research Institute, IPRI, to speak on a subject which is current and under considerable debate. There are a variety of views that have been expressed by subject specialists. It's a rich professional debate, and I'm sure that these views will eventually contribute to a better understanding of the issues involved and lead to realistic conclusions. In the entire debate, as the topic indicates, the essence of the conclusions ought to revolve around the stability of Pakistan's deterrence against India, both strategic and conventional, as one seamless concept based on hardcore ground realities. Before proceeding with presenting my views, I would like to extend my sincere felicitations and compliments to General Majid Hassan and his excellent team IPRI for being ranked 74th in the University of Pennsylvania's Think Tanks and Civil Societies program. To be ranked among the top 75 in international think tanks of the world is no small achievement. I think it's quite huge. This is an outcome of the reforms agenda undertaken by IPRI and is a feather in IPRI's and Pakistan's academic cap. My best wishes for IPRI in its continuous quest for excellence and for achieving even greater heights in the future. And may Allah take you to the next target, the top 50, inshallah. Today's subject, stability of Pakistan's strategic deterrence, has rightly been framed by IPRI in the backdrop of the May 25 escalation in the politico-military environments that emerged in the post-Pahalgam period. Hence, as the concept note states, one needs to evaluate the stability of Pakistan's strategic deterrence in that context. Therefore, in order for all of us to be on the same page with reference to the context, I think that it will be useful if I were to read out verbatim the brief concept note so we all know what the reference point is and what is expected as an outcome in today's debate. The concept note given to me states, strategic stability of nuclear deterrence in the subcontinent is a function of the credibility of the deterrence as well as the efficacy of the conventional deterrence to deny the space for conventional war sought by the stronger protagonist in the conflict equation. While Pakistan has come up trumps in the May standoff employing the air and missile force very effectively, a little more space for conventional missile, drone and air strikes has been opened up by India, compelling creation of a rocket force command by the army. Now the key question is, have we restored the stability of our strategic deterrence through our efficacious conventional response or widened the space for a conventional conflict in a future war? This is the concept note. To begin with, I would like to politely contest the presumptive words the stronger protagonist used in the concept note, presumably for India as a pre-war predetermination. In my opinion, the outcome of the May 25 conflict, in which the concept note correctly states that Pakistan came out trumps, a winner, as indeed, if I may add, trumps and a winner in the February 2019 Pulwama-Balakot conflict as well, does not support the term stronger protagonist for India. I would like to think that the side which came up trumps, the winner, in both the fair contests, despite the TSR metrics, that is time, space, and relative strength of the battle being of India's choice, not once but twice in 6 years, was the real stronger protagonist, and that is Pakistan. As a professional, I do understand that the relative size of the Indian armed forces has traditionally and universally been projected to foster the impression of India being the stronger protagonist in South Asia. That is why, in fact, the coinage on our side for many years of Pakistan operating under the disadvantage of a conventional asymmetry. This coinage has unfortunately got ingrained in our strategic culture as well, with certain inherent psychological downsides. To me, large size is not the entire story, just as the large size of the combined Arab armies versus the Israeli military does not tell the entire story. There are a number of factors of quality, technology, training, and other force multipliers that ought to be taken into account other than the mere large size of armed forces in order to determine the relative strength metrics of any two sides. In South Asia specifically, the nuclear tests of May 98 by India, followed quickly by Pakistan, the universal wisdom that emerged was that a strategic balance had been restored and that in many ways Pakistan's perennial disadvantage of conventional asymmetry had been addressed considerably. Through the conduct of nuclear tests, Pakistan acquired the great equalizer, and that the ghosts of all-out wars in South Asia, and I repeat, all-out wars in South Asia of the 1965 and 71 vintage had been laid to rest. That is why, in fact, the Indian military planners had almost immediately after the nuclear test started to toy with the idea of finding space for a limited war despite the nuclear overhang. They correctly concluded quite realistically that all-out wars of the 65 and 71 vintage were no longer possible. Pakistan's nuclear deterrence came into strong reckoning and assessments, and thereby delivered on the purpose for which it was conceived and developed. The Indian Cold Start doctrine was the outcome of that thought process against a nuclear Pakistan. No more mobilizing and massing of entire armies as in exercise brass tacks and Operation Parakram. Only limited wars seeking to find space for operations despite the nuclear overhang, limited space objectives in a limited time frame, remaining well below Pakistan's perceived nuclear threshold. In the years from 98 onwards, as Pakistan's nuclear capability slowly but surely embarked on a well-defined and focused force development trajectory under the NCSPD, it matured and grew into a robust operationalized force as a comprehensive triad in the ASFC, in the NSFC, and in the AFSC. The capability attained the objectives of the policy of full spectrum deterrence. At this point, sometime around 2011-12, even the Cold Start doctrine, which was reportedly Indian Army-led and did not quite enjoy the ownership of the political government and also perhaps of the Indian Air Force, began to look impractical to the Indian military planners against a nuclear Pakistan, which had by then started to radiate serious deterrence effects through full spectrum deterrence. In fact, on a number of occasions during the ensuing years, Mumbai, Uri, Pathankot, etc., India did not automatically mobilize its independent battle groups for the IBGs within the 48 to 96 hours time frame as was conceived in the Cold Start doctrine. The Theta Force Reserve, the TFRs, too remained in the cool layers of peacetime stations. It seemed that the Cold Start doctrine was dead on arrival against Pakistan's nuclear deterrence. It certainly did not figure out anywhere in the escalations of February 2019 or recently of May 2025. Now, some years ago, the Indians reportedly started to work on a relatively less ambitious dynamic response strategy, or DRS. Some of the elements of the DRS, like airstrikes, employment of standoff weapons, drones, and medium-range missiles like the BrahMos, came into play in the May 25 escalation, but fizzled out rather quickly when Operation Sindoor was contested strongly by the Pakistan Air Force, attaining air superiority in a matter of hours, followed by punishing retaliatory strikes by the Pakistani military in Operation Banyana Mursus, including the destruction of an S-400 battery. A conclusion that can be drawn, therefore, is that large sizes of a military does not per se bestow strength. There are other factors, like I said, of quality, technology, training, and other force multipliers that come into play and determine as to who comes up trumps. It is the final outcome of a war, limited or broader, that decides who the stronger protagonist might be. To me, frankly, at this point in time, having sent the Indian military reeling in two fair contests, it is Pakistan which seems to be the likely stronger protagonist. The India-Pakistan standoff in May 25 was an event which has generated profound and, if I may say, game-changing strategic effects on the future of war and peace, not only in South Asia, but also in an extended region in which I would like to include China and some other countries of Western Asia as well. There are serious political and strategic fallouts internationally, as well in addition to the substantial perceptive change in the military equation. I would like to express with emphasis that Pakistan's nuclear policy of full spectrum deterrence is based on a robust operationalized nuclear capability, which in itself draws strength from a fully functional triad and an effective command and control system. I have explained its various dimensions at numerous national and international forums. It should also be well understood that whenever a situation of a serious military escalation or a crisis occurs in South Asia, like February 19 or May 25, Pakistan's robust nuclear capability simultaneously generates politico-strategic effects in two directions. In the East, in India, where it becomes a limiting factor on the scale scope, and character of military options that India might consider as possible. In the West, halfway around the globe in Washington, D.C., mainly, but also in some key Western capitals on the way, where alarm bells start to ring, compelling willy-nilly diplomatic interventions to manage and cool down the emerging crisis with or without a limited fight. Strategic deterrence and placing a limiting operational cap on crisis escalation are therefore inbuilt in Pakistan's capability of full spectrum deterrence. Unlike India, restraint and responsibility are key considerations in the exercise of Pakistan's nuclear policy. This has been demonstrated time and again. No one in the world is interested in a nuclear Armageddon, except Mr. Modi's India perhaps. In this context, I shall briefly quote a few examples from India-induced past escalations. First, 1986-87, when India's full operational military mobilization with ammunition on Pakistan borders under the garb of exercise brass tacks was called off when India was confronted by Pakistan's conventional forces counter-deployments and subtle nuclear messaging. This was the first in South Asia. 1999, in the Kargil crisis, Mr. Vajpayee's conscious decision to limit India's military responses to within the Kargil area of operations on the Kashmir line of control was a testament to the deterrence effect generated by Pakistan's newly demonstrated nuclear capability in May 98. Next, 2001 and 2, India's Operation Parakram with full military mobilization on Pakistan's borders was called off after 10 futile months when confronted by Pakistan's conventional forces counter-deployments, and this time strong nuclear signaling on at least 3 occasions, including 3 ballistic missile tests of Abdali, Shaheen 1 and Gauri by the SPD inside 4 days in May 2002. Then we come to 2019, post-Pulwama, Modi's risky politico-electoral gamble to hit Balakot in mainland Pakistan with Indian Air Force standoff missiles, which turned out to be non-hits anyway, violating Pakistan's sovereignty and territorial integrity. India then backed off when the Pakistan Air Force unleashed Operation Swift Retort, imposing costs on the Indian Air Force and on military targets on the line of control. Pakistan's nuclear capability prevented further escalation rungs, and then too President Trump 1.0 took pleasure in announcing an end to hostilities while visiting the 2 Koreas. And now in May 25, failing to achieve politico-military objectives and suffering humiliating reverses in the air and on the ground, Mr. Modi accepted a rescue ceasefire hastily brokered by the US. The nuclear factor weighed heavily on the mind of President Trump, which he continues to mention till today. Post May 25, I have followed with some interest misguided, uninformed, and perhaps shallow opinions of sorts amongst Indian analysts on India's attack against a nuclear Pakistan. A conclusion is drawn that Pakistan's nuclear capability did not deter India from attacking mainland Pakistan, and therefore, not only that Pakistan's nuclear bluff was called, but that India also succeeded in carving out the much sought after space for conventional war despite the nuclear overhang. In my opinion, both are anything but half-truths, perhaps quarter. This argument was loosely invoked in February 29 as well by partisan Indian analysts and senior officials. And I think this is more of an amateurish game of point scoring and chest thumping rather than a serious professional conclusion. On 7th May 25, notwithstanding Mr. Modi's bombastic rhetoric about not accepting what he labeled as Pakistan nuclear blackmail, the ground reality was, and this is now public knowledge, that Mr. Modi explicitly ordered his military to limit the operations to the alleged civilian terrorist targets only and not to touch military targets in Pakistan. Foreign Minister Jaishankar openly admitted as much and is on record. The Indian Defense Attaché in Indonesia, Captain Navy Shiv Kumar, complained as much and is on record. If this self-imposed politico-military caution by India was not deterrence against escalation in an environment of nuclear overhang, what else was it? The Indian decision was also based on India's earlier experience of attacking Balakot and the resultant PAF's Operation Swift retort in February 19, that against a heavily armed nuclear Pakistan, escalation rungs can only be climbed a few low notches and no more. Also, there was a caution and an awareness in India that I have mentioned earlier of an early international diplomatic intervention in order to limit a limited war to nothing more than a skirmish. Therefore, the obvious reasons for the explicitly limiting order by Mr. Modi, howsoever strategically and militarily naive, was motivated only by the pursuit of seeking domestic political advantage, as in February 19, and not at all driven by any hi-fi considerations of the logic and theories of deterrence and escalation control. In a sense, Pakistan's nuclear and conventional deterrence remained at work, and therefore the only Indian military option after Pahalgam was to limit the scale and scope of the attack under the laughable expectation of a Pakistani connivance with Jaishankar's publicly admitted request to Pakistan not to retaliate. This was strategic effect generated by Pakistan's full spectrum deterrence in the East. Similarly, in Washington, D.C., the US Vice President J.D. Vance, who had only on the previous evening stated that the India-Pakistan standoff was none of the United States' business, suddenly concluded overnight on the 10th of May that preventing India's further thrashing was indeed the business of the United States. Multiple phone calls did the rest, and India was rescued. Nuclear deterrence effects were at work in the West simultaneously. President Trump has been highlighting this effect ever since every time he speaks about the India-Pakistan standoff that he prevented a nuclear war. Conclusion: Pakistan's full spectrum deterrence worked in both directions, east and west, and was no bluff. It generated deterrence effects as visualized in Pakistan's policy of full spectrum deterrence. India's desire for seeking the so-called space for limited war despite a nuclear overhang remained shrunk as it opted to limit its initial escalation as openly admitted. Subsequently, too, India not only failed to attain any of the politico-strategic military objectives, and far from it suffered major military reverses, especially in the IEF, and severe reputational damage regionally and internationally. For India, I think Operation Sindoor became an anticlimax and boomeranged on its planners. It is likely to be a chastening experience for India's future decision-making. Also, please note the interesting fact that in the last few years, operational terminologies in South Asia and in international jargon have also undergone a subtle downgrade. Instead of wars and limited wars, we now refer to the short military engagement between India and Pakistan as escalation, retaliation, and skirmishes. I think the shift in the choice of words is in itself a fair indicator that the twin effects of nuclear deterrence, as well as the lack of international appetite for violence by conventional forces between two nuclear powers, has played a positive role. To keep things in perspective, and because the Indians went into a grand propaganda overdrive to falsify their losses and grossly exaggerate Pakistan's losses in an attempt to concoct a victory of sorts, I would like to recall briefly the essence of the events to highlight the clearly poor performance of India's overrated conventional forces, particularly the Indian Air Force, against a relatively underrated adversary for Pakistan. From this recall will flow some answers to further today's debate. The doctrinal and operational brilliance of the Pakistan Air Force won the war for Pakistan in the very first hour on the 7th of May 25, when India, a nuclear power, attacked civilian targets in mainland Pakistan, an equally strong nuclear power, and violated its territorial integrity and sovereignty. The Indian strategic judgment in risking a nuclear Armageddon can only be labeled as one of the most bizarre and irresponsible acts in the annals of military history. The 40-odd PF fighters, backed up by an integrated array of multi-domain operational capabilities, versus the pride of 72 IEF fighters in a ratio of nearly 1:2, wrote a glorious history in modern aerial combat. In a historic but intense technology-driven air battle to close to 1 hour, The PF took the IAF on and changed the strategic balance of South Asia, I think, for a long time now. Having been shot out of the skies by the PF by losing 7 frontline fighters, the IAF retreated post-haste, having delivered their payload while remaining inside their own space. Notwithstanding India's unsuccessful efforts at spinning a disjointed and contradictory cover-up all the way till even today, the international strategic and defense community, and the IAF for sure, has got its figures right. 4 Rafales, 1 Mirage 2000, 1 MiG-29, 1 Su-30, and 1 Heron UAV, a total of 8 top-of-the-line aircraft. French, Russian, and Israeli technology in the hands of the IAF altogether hit Mother Earth inside 1 hour in a dazzling display of incompetence. Losses on the PF side zilch, duly confirmed and accounted for by all OEMs. Little wonder that the 800 fighters strong IAF was grounded for 48 hours, and this in a war of a total of 87 hours, conveniently sitting out half the war, but later claiming to have learned quick lessons and launching standoff weapons from the cool safety of space. At least the Indian Chief of Defense Staff, the CDS, General Anil Chauhan, unlike his shoddy political masters, had the soldiers' decency to concede that much. Out of soldierly decency, I too would not like to mock the IAF Chief, Air Chief Marshal A.P. Singh, for his time-barred claims, afterthoughts, and dreams. The 8th and the 9th of May 25 were rest days for the Indian Armed Forces, except that they did launch some 80-plus Harop drones, loitering quite aimlessly over a number of Pakistani cities, only to be shot down in a merry shooting spree by Pakistan's air defenses. The only damage that the 80-plus Harop drones inflicted was on the reputation of Israeli technology and the Indian handling of the Israeli technology. And finally dawned the morning of the 10th of May, when a few IAF aircraft came out of their PF-imposed hiding and from the safety of the Indian airspace attacked selected PF bases with limited numbers of standoff weapons, including the BrahMos cruise missiles, once again inflicting negligible damage. The Pakistani armed forces, which had exercised restraint thus far, but had announced their right to retaliation to India's attack and violation of Pakistan's territory and sovereignty, now went the whole hog by launching Operation Banyan Marsoos in 4 hours of a punishing blitz of ground and air firepower on a variety of Indian military bases, 26 in all. No civilian targets, unlike India's opening salvos on the 7th May. Amongst much else that was targeted and destroyed, 2 of India's prized S-400 batteries at Adnampur and Bhuj were also taken out by the PF. And for domestic PR reasons, Mr. Modi quickly got himself photographed in front of one of the remnants of the unfortunate battery while placing new orders with Russia as replacement for the S-400. Pakistan Army's Al-Fatah missiles and artillery had a field day in attacking Indian units and headquarters on the line of control in Kashmir and inside mainland India. The resultant Indian operational situation in those 4 hours under the Pakistani firepower blitz was best summed up by CNN's Nick Robertson in his dispatch the same evening. He said India didn't know what happened. And for CNN to say that is saying a lot. Operation Banyan Marsoos, which lasted some 3 to 4 hours only, convinced India to cut further critical losses, which were piling up rapidly by the hour, in addition to the first night loss of 7 top-of-the-line fighter aircraft and an Israeli Heron UAV. India had had enough. It asked for US intervention. Any subsequent denials to that effect by India in order to regain lost political ground and as part of a domestic disinformation campaign can be easily corrected by a simple replay of the Indian military spokesperson Colonel Sofia Qureshi's television pleadings on the 10th May afternoon that India was ready for a ceasefire if Pakistan was. It was a white flag which the poor girl had been asked to put up on behalf of the 1.2 million Indian military, and on behalf of the muscular Mr. Modi himself. The might and pride of India found it convenient to hide behind her coattails. The results are laid bare before the entire world to see and accept as India stands humiliated militarily, politically, and is also now displaying signs of socio-political stress in its polity due to the stunning defeat against an adversary that India grossly underestimated on all accounts. True to form, nevertheless, India has been trying to project through frivolous and utterly false propaganda, mainly for home consumption, that it scored a victory over Pakistan. To the utter disappointment of India, though, none in the international community has bought the Indian story. The international media has consistently put out stories and analyses of India's poor battle performance. The damage that was inflicted on critical Indian military assets by the Pakistani military in the 4 days cannot be hidden or wished away in this day and age of super technology. The stock markets do not lie. Pakistan not only surprised and stunned India, but also surprised and stunned the world. What started as an escalatory war between two nuclear-armed neighbors soon transited to a much larger global debate about superior Chinese technology versus Western technology. The debate invoked not only strategic implications and consequences as far away as Taiwan, Asia Pacific, ASEAN, Europe and NATO, but also for the global arms trade industry, as the stock markets reacted to reflect the ground reality of a classic technology demonstration by the Pakistan Air Force. The debate has become one of China versus France by a tennis score of 7-0. In 3.5 unforgettable days, it has been firmly established that is now the Pakistan Air Force and not the Indian Air Force that is the dominant air power in South Asia. The Pakistan Air Force rules the skies. When the PA brought down the pride of Western, Russian and Israeli technology to the ground in a matter of few hours, the PF had acquired a position of air superiority. The Rafale fleet was grounded and pulled back, and the IAF for all practical purposes became what we might call an LOB, left out of battle. The IAF was not only outranged by the PL-15 BVR, it was also, if I may use my own term, out-teched by the deadly PF operation strategy of multi-domain operations based on the integration of J-10, JF-17, PL-15, BVR missiles, AWACS, EW, and an overall superior air defense ground environment. In terms of strategic consequences, it seemed like a modern-day replay of the 1967 Arab-Israel War, when on the morning of the 5th of June 1967, the Israeli Air Force, in a preemptive strike, decimated the combined Arab air forces of Egypt, Jordan, and Syria in a matter of a few hours. The Israeli Air Force has ever since ruled the Middle Eastern skies unchallenged, and here in South Asia, 48 years later, the balance of air power shifted inside 60 momentous minutes. Please note that the outcome of most conventional modern wars since World War II have been shaped by air power and air domination. Military operations, whether on air, land or sea, require air superiority as the fundamental prerequisite for operational success. In this context, I would like to quote the extraordinary vision statement from a speech of Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah, who, while visiting PF Station Risalpur on 13th April 1948, said, "A country without a strong air force is at the mercy of any aggressor. Pakistan must build up our air force as quickly as possible. It must be an efficient air force, second to none." You will find this prophetic 1948 quotation of the Qaid at the entrance of every base and institution of the Pakistan Air Force. The Qaid's vision laid the foundations of the core values that Pakistan Air Force would follow for all times to come. I think if the Qaid was alive today, he would have saluted the Pakistan Air Force for delivering on his command in great style. Today, as a consequence of Operation Sindoor, the one irrefutable new normal that has emerged with sufficient clarity is that in South Asia today, the PF rules the skies. Despite being smaller in size and initially perceived to be technologically and numerically inferior to the IEF, the PF has smashed the Indian hubris down as it shot out of the skies the pride of India's frontline combat aircraft. The PF proved its ascendancy in all ranks and dominated the will of the enemy while creating superior effects both in kinetic and non-kinetic domains. Its synergy with the Army and the Navy also led to superiority in undertaking multi-domain operations during the short period of time. Now looking to the future, the PF is now likely to fast-track the induction of the J-35 stealth fighter and the relevant PL series of BVR missiles, as well as perhaps enhance its J-10 and PL-15 inventories. These acquisitions, which are probably not too far away, will further enhance the qualitative gap between the PF and the IEF. Moreover, acquisition of niche capabilities in the multi-domain fields of cyber warfare, electronic warfare, space, etc., will also enhance the PF's non-kinetic capabilities. And I don't see this gap being closed by the IEF anytime soon. Therefore, with the IEF having been rendered to second place, amounting to a PF air superiority in South Asia, any future operation by India, notwithstanding Mr. Modi's political rhetoric, are likely to remain confined to standoff capabilities, missiles, drones, etc. But standoff capabilities alone do not win wars, neither can they support ground operations by the Indian Army or maritime operations by the Indian Navy. I would like to highlight a few strategic notions which have emerged in the post-escalation debate. To begin with, India's determination to challenge the concept of deterrence by conducting a false flag operation was followed by a politically driven commitment trap, compelling India to break down deterrence, escalate and physically commit forces to kinetic offensive actions by striking targets inside Pakistan and in Azad Kashmir, thereby compelling Pakistan in turn to undertake appropriate kinetic retaliatory actions in order to re-establish deterrence, as I mentioned. The lead role of air power as the frontline instrument of deterrence, as well as for the re-establishment of deterrence, duly supported by robust ground action by the Army and operational deployments by the Pakistan Navy. The emergence of a variety of new normals as a consequence of the Indian escalation and Pakistan's retaliation. The strategic role of Pakistan's robust nuclear capability by its sheer force in being state as a deterrent to large-scale operations or all-out war as a final guarantor of peace and stability. The reality of this short escalation is that India started it as per a predictable playbook, almost a hackneyed SOP by now. It replicated the Pulwama 2019 false flag operation, this time at Pahalgam, and used it as a casus belli, but on a larger scale of operations. It employed aerial platforms to begin with, followed by indiscriminate employment of a variety of strategic, operational, and tactical standoff weapons in its brazen attack on mainland Pakistan and Azad Kashmir. In its exaggerated sense of politico-military arrogance and hubris, gross overestimation of its own capabilities, gross underestimation of Pakistan's conventional capabilities, especially of the Pakistan Air Force, and ignoring the nuclear environment prevailing in South Asia, India threw all caution to the wind and tested the limits of Pakistan's conventional and nuclear thresholds. Prime Minister Modi has talked of the emergence of a new normal in South Asia post-Operation Sindoor. Of course, there's a new normal, except the new normal as now defined by Pakistan. And some of these are: air superiority has changed hands. The PF is now the dominant air power in South Asia. This is the new normal. Further, the new normal is that this dominance gap is likely to be widened with even greater technology inductions in the PF in the near future. The new normal is that the battle-proven conventional deterrence of the Pakistan Air Force, as well as the firepower of Pakistan's land-based conventional deterrent system, has assumed a lead deterrence role in South Asia, thereby adding a strong deterrence layer between the conventional and strategic deterrence. The new normal is that as per the old normal, Pakistan's robust nuclear deterrence will continue to exercise strategic level deterrence in order to limit and curtail India's political and operational objectives, thereby ensuring the maintenance of relative peace and strategic stability in South Asia. The new normal is that in case of a renewed Indian conventional attack on Pakistan, which Mr. Modi is so fond of threatening despite having sued for a ceasefire, Pakistan's conventional retaliation to his escalation will always be a notch-up response, as Field Marshal Asim Munir has promised, a quid pro quo plus for sure. The new normal is that the old normal of international alarm will continue to compel the international community to intervene in any future Indo-Pakistani conflict and prevent hostilities from going beyond certain well-defined parameters well before touching nuclear thresholds. Whether Mr. Modi likes it or not, Pakistan's nuclear weapons, which he referred to as nuclear blackmail, will continue to define the limits of India's kinetic freedom of action. And now to answer the key question raised in the concept note. Have we restored the stability of our strategic deterrence through our efficacious conventional response, or widened the space for a conventional conflict in a future war scenario? There are two sub-portions of the question as I see it. First, have we restored the stability of our strategic deterrence? And second, have we widened the space for a conventional conflict in a future war scenario? The question of restoring the stability of our strategic deterrence would arise only if our assessment was that the stability of the strategic deterrence had been rendered unstable or weakened in the first place. In my opinion, neither of the two happened. The strategic deterrence was neither rendered unstable nor was it weakened. As the ultimate deterrence quite clearly visible in the background, Pakistan's strategic deterrence continued to radiate strategic effects in the two directions, east and west. In the east, it put limits on the scale and scope of Indian escalation, as admitted by Jaishankar and the Indian Defense Attaché. In the west, the strategic deterrence attracted prompt diplomatic intervention to contain the conflict. My conclusion, therefore, is that Pakistan's strategic deterrence remains stable and effective. As to the second portion of the question, in my opinion, there is perhaps a partial element of agreement in that Indian risk-taking in planning its initial military escalation by the Indian Air Force in large numbers and later by the employment of BrahMos missiles, Harab drones and other standoff weapons did widen the space for a conventional conflict when compared to previous escalations. However, the question whether India would want to repeat this pattern of a widened conventional escalation or an even wider escalation in a future conflict will be dependent on a number of factors. And some of these could be the below par performance of the Indian force repeatedly on two occasions is likely to be a constraining factor. It will be further augmented by the consideration that with time the PF is likely to be an even more potent force capable of inflicting greater attrition on the IEF. Will India learn its lessons and avoid further material and reputation loss to the IEF? B. Having suffered a punishing firepower blitz, a notch-up response, a quid pro quo plus by the large variety of Pakistan's land-based delivery systems in retaliation, as promised by the Pakistan military spokesperson and indeed by the Army Chief Field Marshal Asim Munir, will India have second thoughts on launching Operation Sindoor, the sequel? C. India has been boasting about the possibility of starting the next conflict from the seaward direction by the Indian Navy. India will have to consider that attacking or even threatening Pakistan's ports and strategic lines of communications, locks, will be an unacceptable crossing of a critical red line. Economic strangulation of Pakistan has already been identified as one of Pakistan's nuclear thresholds. In any case, with the PF and the Pakistan Navy jointly guarding the Pakistan's maritime interests in force, will a seaward escalation by India be a practical option or a disaster? And D, in the domain of international diplomacy, the Indian experience on at least two recent occasions of prompt international diplomatic intervention in a South Asian kinetic conflict ought to be a planning consideration. Additionally and importantly, if India is looking at a Chinese bailout or a balancing act against the worsening relations with the US, India will have to consider the strong strategic relationship between China and Pakistan. Before I end, I would like to say a few words on the creation by the Pakistan Army of the Army Rocket Force Command, the ARFC, because the concept note also mentions that the Indian escalation of May 25 compelled Pakistan to create a Rocket Force Command. I'm not sure whether it was compelled by the May 25 escalation or whether its creation was already in the works. In my opinion, the creation of the Army Rocket Force Command is an operationally correct step, a bold one, and a need of the times. Essentially, the issue revolves around three aspects. A, the ARFC provides for centralized and unified articulation of command of Pakistan's land-based long-range conventional missiles, firepower, under the GHQ so as to be responsive directly to the operational requirements of the GHQ without intermediary headquarters. Exactly as the Army Strategic Force Command, the ASFC, provides for similar articulation of command under the NCSPD for Pakistan's land-based nuclear delivery systems. Having thus separated the operational employment of land-based conventional missiles from the land-based nuclear delivery systems of the NCSPD, the creation of the ARFC also considerably resolves the age-old dilemma which academics have often pointed out of judging whether an incoming missile carries a conventional warhead or a nuclear warhead. The ARFC provides an additional layer of strategic deterrence between the operations of conventional forces and the potential employment of nuclear forces, thereby in some ways raising nuclear thresholds. It needs to be noted that the oft-quoted 4 nuclear thresholds of Pakistan were initiated over a quarter century ago as per the strategic and operational demands of the then prevailing operational environments. In this period, one has witnessed phenomenal changes in the nature and character of warfare, as well as in the induction of multiple types of emerging technologies in all the 3 services worldwide. The advent of supersonic and hypersonic missiles and other standoff weapons in modern inventories are one such example. Warfighting doctrines too continue to be refined in the light of the foregoing advancements. We have witnessed fairly generous employment of long-range conventional missiles and standoff weapons between nuclear Russia and non-nuclear Ukraine, between nuclear Israel and non-nuclear Iran, and then between nuclear India and nuclear Pakistan in May 25. By creating the ARFC, the Pakistan Army has simply responded to a need of the modern battlefield. However, as mentioned earlier, Pakistan nuclear deterrence remains in place as the ultimate shield, which not only limits the scale and scope of Indian military operations, despite the presence of relative conventional asymmetry, but it also generates strategic effects internationally, thereby inviting rapid diplomatic interventions time and again. All in all, therefore, the creation of the ARFC in the Pakistan Army was an operational necessity to address the demands of the South Asian strategic landscape, and that, in my opinion, has been met. To conclude, I would like to state that the strategic stability of Pakistan nuclear deterrence has remained and will remain a robust factor for the larger strategic stability of South Asia. Notwithstanding Mr. Modi's penchant for risk-taking for purely domestic political advantage, Pakistan has continued to respond to Indian provocations with restraint and responsibility. However, when confronted by kinetic force, Pakistan's response has been quick and severe and has compelled India to seek cessation of hostilities on each occasion, having milked the escalation for political gains. Consequent to the May 25 escalation by India, Pakistan's response was of a nature which ought to improve operational perspectives in the Indian military to bring these in closer alignment with the hardcore military ground realities of South Asia. Whether India would like to yet again make use of the so-called widened space for a future conventional conflict will, in my opinion, be a judgment call by India, depending on some of the hard lessons it may or may not have learned from its disastrous reputational and political-military May 25 experience. I thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you so much, sir, for a very thought-provoking speech. I would now like to open the floor for a question and answer session. I would request the respected participants to please keep their questions short and brief so we can accommodate maximum number of questions. Sir, please.
Sir, a very comprehensive discourse. Thank you, sir. Sir, my question is about the restoration and the stability, which in your opinion was never in doubt, and perhaps you're correct in that assessment. But by creating a conventional rocket force, operationally it might make sense because we had those artillery assets and we have articulated, we are now going to articulate it better through a command, essentially a core command. But by opening up and by signaling that now we are ready to trade conventional payload for conventional payload, haven't we opened up and haven't we diluted our deterrence? Because if we had signaled to them that, look, even if you come through a conventional payload, which is a dangerous gambit, we'll go with our nuclear, that would have enhanced credibility and strength of your nuclear deterrence.
Your second portion first. Any threat to go nuclear must have credibility. And if you, what I said, they've been calling nuclear bluff has been called. If you use that too frequently, or in a very limited war and a skirmish, etc., then genuinely it might be called a bluff. So nuclear threat dena at the drop of a hat, I think it's not wise. It'll lose its credibility, it'll lose its efficacy, and it will certainly be categorized as a bluff all the time. The first portion, by adding rocket forces, we have enhanced the space. Battles, development in forces, historically, we all know, is something that is a continuous process. Technology comes in one side, the technology is matched by the other side, the disturbed balance is re-restored, and so this game of one-upmanship, balancing it out, in a second-upmanship and balancing it out, this is a constant factor. For some years now, India has introduced the BrahMos missiles, standoff weapons, etc., etc. Pakistan is also, therefore, it was compelled to do more or less similar, because you have to match that capability, because there is no other way, short of finding where they are and going and hitting it with the Air Force or with some other weapon systems. So delivering a rocket force, Al-Fatah series 1, 2, 3, 4, and some long-range artillery weapons, etc., which now form part of the RFC, is a compulsion of technology advancements and technology matching from the other side. If they have brought in a certain type of force, Pakistan is compelled to bring in a similar kind of force. Now, Air Force की बात कर लेना. Your constant battle is for one-upmanship in the generation, 4th generation, 4.5 generation, 4.5 generation, 5th generation. So ये तो एक sequential वो है battle which is endless. And with technology coming in, emerging technologies coming in, all types of emerging technologies coming in, this will not stop. Therefore, introducing the rocket forces was one. The second thing, I think the main aspect is articulation of command. इसको कौन command करेगा? Respond इसने करना directly GHQ को, MO को. और अगर वो कोर्स में पड़ा रहेगा, या for that matter SPD में पड़ा रहेगा, वो response नहीं आएगी. Therefore, ये 2-3 reasons मैंने आपको दिए हैं कि ये एक compulsion था. Mainly articulation of command का and separation of conventional rocket forces versus the nuclear missile forces.
Hello, good morning. My name is Salim Ansari. I am former DG Nuclear Power Engineering in Atomic Energy Commission. My question is about the global nuclear arms limitation efforts. I would like to draw your attention to the latest issue of the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, which says that there are over 12,000 annihilating nuclear weapons in the world. With impending war in Europe, they have quoted that with an impending war in Europe and the two nuclear adversaries in South Asia, they said that the world is closest to doomsday, as they call it. The doomsday clock is closest to 12 o'clock now, as it was ever before. The lack of any international nuclear arms limitation treaty also adds to this, to this fear, this global fear. So, what is your take? Are you hopeful of any such treaty that would limit the nuclear weapons in the world? Thank you.
Frankly, ये जो है the global arms limitations, talks, agreements, disagreements, backing out of agreements. Was basically a US versus Soviet Union game. I don't think anybody else was involved in it. Just two countries, USA, USSR. USSR became Russia. Disintegrate हो गया, उसने inherit कर लिए USSR वाले weapons, यूक्रेन ने भी छोड़ दिए, Central Asian countries थी, उन्होंने भी छोड़ दिए, so everything went into the Russian pocket. And then of course there was hubris policy decision in Washington that they thought they could overcome now that Russia was a weak state. वो एक game separate game था और है. America has backed out of so many arms limitation agreements, and at this point in time, especially with the Ukraine war on in full fury, I don't think there is any chance of a talk of a strategic arms or tactical arms limitation talks. कहीं peace होगा, peace के बाद कोई some home truths will be understood by the two rivals, maybe in the future. China is not part of that. So China continues to develop its nuclear forces as per its own visualization. You can leave out Israel, you can leave out North Korea because they have their own compulsions. So none of the other countries are part of those global limitations talks. Now come to South Asia. South Asia में India, Pakistan action-reaction syndrome basically has driven the nuclear weapons race, and we all know the history of that. 74 Pokhran 1, Pokhran 2, Pakistan nuclear program, matching pre-SPD, post-SPD, वगैरह वगैरह. So the state, according to bulletin of atomic scientists, there are certain X number and Y numbers with India and Pakistan. There has been some proposals by Pakistan, starting with post-98, in fact, strategic restraint regime and things like that. But India has not been keen on those. They have their own logic of China being a greater threat, and therefore they have to have a certain numbers, not superpower, but regional power at least. So ये एक triangular game है, जिसमें Pakistan has maintained and will continue to maintain a strategic balance in its nuclear forces as the ultimate guarantor of stability. Within that umbrella, the conventional forces, Air Force, Navy, the Army, the Rocket Force, वगैरह वगैरह, corps, ये doctrinal aspects, organizational aspects, कभी वो रैपिड बन जाएगा, कभी वो दूसरा बन जाएगा, तीसरा बन जाएगा, तो इंडिया की साइड से पाकिस्तान will continue to respond. So conventional forces की stability will continue to be maintained by Pakistan as a response to Indian one-upmanship, change in doctrines. Or nuclear forces की similarly, the balance of strategic balance will not be allowed to be compromised. So इसलिए मैंने एक किस्म का ग्लोबल को सेपरेट कर दिया, उसका इंडिया पाकिस्तान कैन नेवर बी अ पार्ट. वो बेसिकली रशिया, नेटो वगैरह की मिसाल है. एनपीटी इज अ वेरी डिफरेंट बॉल गेम ना. एनपीटी का ज़माना ख़त्म हो गया. एनपीटी का तो पाकिस्तान के लिए सवाल ही पैदा नहीं होता ना. एनपीटी मीन्स यू कट ऑफ योर हैंड्स एंड बिकम अ नॉन न्यूक्लियर वेपन्स पावर. तो दैट इज जस्ट अ थ्योरेटिकल एकेडमिक आर्गुमेंट. पाकिस्तान एनपीटी साइन कर ले, इफ दैट्स व्हाट यू आर सेइंग. नो, हाइपोथेटिकली अगर ऐसी कोई चीज़ होगी, पाकिस्तान विल आई एम श्योर मेक solid assessments of the situation at that point in time. And अगर कोई balance reduction की बात होती है उसमें पाकिस्तान might be interested, but unilateral reductions तो out of question है. Balance reductions तो strategic restraint regime का भी हिस्सा है. जो पाकिस्तान ने प्रपोजल अब से 20 साल 25 साल से दिया हुआ है उसमें भी वो है कन्वेंशनल फोर्सेस, न्यूक्लियर फोर्सेस, मिसाइल फोर्सेस, सबके लिए बैलेंस रिडक्शन या बैलेंस्ड मैनेजमेंट का है. बट द की वर्ड इज बैलेंस. तो आप किस हद तक कम करेंगे, पाकिस्तान किस हद तक कम करेंगे, वो एक जजमेंट कॉल होगी. लेकिन ये थियोरेटिकल है. जब प्रैक्टिकल होगा तो यू कैन रेस्ट अश्योर्ड दैट हुएवर आर द पाकिस्तानी लीडरशिप एट दैट टाइम एट दैट पॉइंट इन टाइम, they will take into account the need for retaining a strategic balance.
Any more questions and comments?
Assalamu alaikum, sir. This is Zuhair Warif from National Defence University. Sir, in the recent times, we have seen that India is gradually enhancing its military capabilities. It could be standoff weapons, the naval modernization, and the precision-guided munitions, with the formation of Rudra and Bhairava battalions. Besides that, the formation announcement of Sudarshan Chakra by Narendra Modi in the 16th of August, what kind of implication is that going to have upon Pakistan, and what should be Pakistan's response to this? Thank you. Sudarshan Chakra by Narendra Modi. Yes. Sir, the integrated air defense weapon system that.
May I use one word? Laughable. Laughable. आपने इजराइल का हाल देख लिया. 3-layered iron dome and what not, and how much penetration on a small country, this size of probably my thumb, that has been penetrated repeatedly by Iran, by the Houthis, and even some others, Hezbollah वगैरह. Now look at India. It's a massive country. He's talking of a iron dome kind of a thing for India. I said it's laughable. बड़ी मुश्किल से they got these 5 to 6 S-400 batteries concentrated in a few places, and you've seen उनके साथ क्या हशर हुआ है. They could not defend. A city like New Delhi perhaps requires maybe at least 2 to 3 S-400 batteries, just the one city. A city like Calcutta will probably need another 3 to 4 S-400 type of batteries. तो मैंने तो अपने फुल स्पेक्ट्रम डिटरेंस में कभी जब डिफाइन करता हूँ उसमें आई कॉल इंडिया अ टारगेट रिच इंडिया. लुक एट द वास्टनेस एंड द अवेलेबिलिटी ऑफ अ वैरायटी ऑफ टारगेट्स, काउंटर फोर्स, काउंटर वैल्यू, बैटलफील्ड. किस किस को डिफेंड करेंगे? This requires a massive effort which cannot guarantee that a nuclear weapon will not penetrate. If New Delhi puts up 3 or 4 S-400 batteries, basically it's against the Air Force perhaps. But they also claim ballistic missile को defend करेगा. जैसे पाकिस्तान ने अगर ऐसे मैं random कह रहा हूँ, अगर X number missiles plan किए हुए हैं न्यू दिल्ली के लिए, all they need to make it maybe X+4, X+5, and there goes your ballistic missile defense of the S-400 or the local version. So I think that it is quite laughable.
We'll take the question from the last line, Mekri.
Ji. Thank you, General Sahab. General Sahab, my question is in any conflict, who will shape strategic deterrence? Is it the country that will demonstrate restraint or the one that will go on to exhibit escalation? Thank you.
दोबारा बोलिए जरा.
So मैं कह रहा हूँ कि who will reshape strategic deterrence in any conflict? वो मुल्क जो restraint show करेगा या फिर वो country जो escalation की तरफ माइल होगा?
I can quote May 25 as a good example. Strategic deterrence किसने re-establish किया? उस country ने जिसने initially restraint show किया, they tried to put some sense into the other party. But when that sense was not forthcoming, Pakistan retaliated with full force, and with full force, conventional forces ने, अभी न्यूक्लियर की तो बारी नहीं आती, न्यूक्लियर तो मैंने कहा बैकग्राउंड में एक है, तो उस conventional forces ने 10th मई को strategic deterrence re-establish कर दिया. So Pakistan की policy will continue to be guided by restraint and responsibility that it always has, conventional forces में and nuclear forces में most certainly. And the initiator invariably, as history has shown, of breakdown of deterrence or attempt to break down deterrence will be India. And Pakistan has a strategic response policy in which it will respond. May 25 is a good example, February 2019 is a very good example, and I think that pattern will probably hold for the future.
Sir, please.
Assalamu alaikum, sir. I'm Ambassador Sajjad. Sir, a Rafale performance, and that was in a way poorly described. So despite this, India is going to purchase more Rafale. So how do you see that one? It is a kind of a give and take with President Trump to provide F-35, or further going for purchase order of Rafale. And reportedly, we have learned that Indonesia, they were also interested to buy or cancel the order of Rafale.
To begin with, I am not an Air Force expert. There is a lot of technical aspects involved in selection of a platform, and it is best done by the professionals of the Air Force. However, having said that, from what I know a bit, I would read a bit, 114 Rafales have been added, they've been demanded. उससे पहले I think 26 aircraft carrier के लिए भी M version, maritime version 26 वो भी order किए गए. The numbers will increase most certainly. They will get closer to perhaps 180 or something, 170. How will the PF, first of all, the time frame. First of all, is a question of time frame. This 114 will not be inducted overnight, obviously. At the minimum, if I'm not wrong, I think it will take at least a decade. Maybe a few off the shelf, one odd squadron maybe. But उसमें भी 2-3 साल I think लग जाते हैं. तो 114, 26 aircraft carrier वाले maritime version, I think it will take at least a decade. This is 2025. 2035 में आप प्रोजेक्ट करें, 2035 में 250 Rafale आएगा. इस 2035 में पाकिस्तान एयरफोर्स किधर पहुंच चुकी होगी? एक्शन रिएक्शन सिंड्रोम है ना, और पाकिस्तान एयरफोर्स जहाँ तक मुझे पता देर ऑलरेडी दे क्लेम एंड आई हैव नो डाउट टू डाउट देयर क्लेम कि इंडिया को कैचअप करते करते, अगर पीएफ आज स्टैटिक हो जाए ना, इंडिया को कैचअप करते करते 10 साल लगेंगे. एम आई राइट? दिस इज व्हाट द पीएफ सेज. 10 साल नहीं लगेंगे, 5 साल लगेंगे, 10 साल. इट्स अ बैटल फॉर टाइम ऑल्सो. सो पीएफ वुड हैव बीन, आई थिंक 10 साल में पीएफ ने भी काफ़ी क्वालिटेटिव एंड परहैप्स क्वांटिटेटिव एडवांसमेंट्स कर ली होंगी. और फिर ये मल्टी डोमेन कॉम्बिनेशन जो है, this is something which the PAF has perfected and displayed. How will it play out in a future where how strengthened the Indians will feel that now we have 175 Rafales? How will they play out again? हो सकता है उस वक्त पाकिस्तान के पास JF-35 तो मेरे ख्याल से certainly आ चुका होगा, 5th generation. Who knows 10 years में which next Chinese platform of stealth, 5th generation, 6th generation का शायद आ चुका होगा. So it is, to me, I think India की जो air वो है ना situation, they admitted themselves. खुद वो कहते हैं, आप पढ़ें उनके लिटरेचर, उनके सर्विस ऑफिसर्स की, they are down to 29 squadrons. 42 का उनका टारगेट रहा है हमेशा से, और अब विद द फेजिंग आउट ऑफ द MiG-21s आखिरी जो चले गए हैं, अब जैसे 29 स्क्वाड्रन्स हैं. इट्स ऑलमोस्ट एट पार, स्लाइट एज ऑफ नंबर्स अगेंस्ट द पाकिस्तान एयरफोर्स. सो ये एक ऐसा गेम है जिसमें आई एम 200% श्योर that PAF now having gained an advantage at this point in time, they will not let go of this advantage too easily. This advantage, I think, will be pressed home irrespective of what the Indian Air Force might do. But we also have to look out in the meanwhile for the जो topic इन्होंने दिया हुआ है, which is conventional space for stand-off weapons. वो कहाँ तक हो रहा है? So we have to look out on all fronts and keep pace with that technology. So Rafale is one aspect, but then there are others. You have to find solutions to the BrahMos. You have to find solutions to the hypersonic, which might be coming. You have to find solutions to the other stand-off weapons that are coming. So, and then of course, land, army में changes आ रहे हैं doctrines के. Navy का threat वो करते हैं कि this time India, Navy will take the initiative, lead लेगी. It's a comprehensive review and a comprehensive assessments that Pakistan will continue to make. This is our bread and butter. Armed forces का bread and butter और क्या है? To keep alive and to keep pace and find solutions to any imbalance that might be emerging. And the bottom line will be, I said to some other question also, कि पाकिस्तान strategic balance जो है वो disturb नहीं होने देगा, ना nuclear side पे ना conventional side पे.
Instead of a single individual taking credit for all this exercise. By doing so, do you not believe that he is trying to outclass or outshine the role of international community by single-handedly and freelancing in a freelancing way carrying out this entire peace activity?
I think it's a political question, and I would best avoid it. President Trump has taken credit for it. He has taken credit for it over 30 times, and over 30 times India has denied that credit to him. In effect, they have called him a liar. What is the truth really? वो diplomats को behind the scenes पता होगा. ये political question है कि international कौन सी body है जो Washington DC के अलावा exist करती है, which could have intervened. I am not aware of any such body. So जो power का center है as of today is Washington, and Washington means the president and his team. So अगर वो credit ले रहे हैं, I think ठीक ही ले रहे होंगे. मेरे पास कोई inside information नहीं है.
This brings us to the end of the question and answer session. I would like to ask President IPRI to please come and say thank you to the distinguished.
Sir, thank you very much for enlightening us today. It was very educative and of a great value. Your visit has really helped IPRI in our understanding of the perspective of the latest incidents. Since there are very large number of youngsters sitting, I would just like to add a small little. If you want to actually see the actual Indian intent about Pakistan, please study the Indians' stance after 11th May, from between 11th May to 28th May. Indian broke hell up against Pakistan, and they would have actually achieved a permanent status of a compliant state of Pakistan had we not responded on 28th May. And actually, probably we wouldn't have been able to test our nuclear capability after 28th May had we budged or had we winked in that circumstance. It was this, ये जो 4 दिनों की आपने एक Indian offensive देखा था against Pakistan, it was much more than that. And I remember I was in Military Operations Directorate in one night. Once we were actually on a very critical stage of moving our very important material to the test sites. There were extensive Indian firing all along the LOC. There were very confirmed reports regarding Israeli fighter aircrafts in Srinagar Air Base, and there was a PIA aircraft which was hijacked on its flight from Gwadar to Karachi, and the hijackers asked the crew to take it to Indian city of Hyderabad. So these were the type of physical actions they were taking, and for your information, 1998 is known in Army as a artillery exchange war in Kashmir. The amount of shelling which both the countries exchanged was closer to the total number of artillery shells fired in Second World War. And there were thousands of casualties. Our entire upper Neelam Valley was cut off from rest of the world for almost 1.5 years. Hundreds of people had to migrate to Muzaffarabad, and we were barely able to sustain our troops there through Tarla Jor Shardi and through Shuntar Valley from the FCNA side. So these were the, Pakistan probably is the only country which is denying Indians hegemony in this region, and will continue to do so. And after probably 98, this was in May 2025, that had we not responded the way we responded, we would have actually gone again back to the status of those compliant states which India is very pleased to have around him. And the best thing I think I would draw from the guest speaker's speech is that probably because of the uniqueness of our contiguity of 2 nuclear states, our compulsion to maintain a very strong conventional force to actually keep the strategic deterrence alive would actually, I think, will remain intact. We will not be able to go for that ideal establishment of a strategic deterrence where you reduce your conventional forces and actually deter the enemy from a war through your strategic assets. That probably would not, we will not be able to do that in foreseeable future. Sir, once again, I thank you for your time here and a very comprehensive speech. Thank you very much, sir.
Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes our today's session. On behalf of IPRI, I would like to express my deepest appreciation to all the distinguished guests and participants for joining us.